The galaxy was very old, older than memory, older than mercy, across thousands of star systems. Powerful alien races ruled space. They had strong fleets, advanced weapons, and minds that believed they were superior. They had fought many wars, wiped out countless species, and turned whole worlds into dust. To them, survival was simple. The strong lived, the weak disappeared. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only just begun to travel between stars. Their ships were slow, their weapons were simple, their worlds were open, vibrant, and full of life. From far away, the ancient alien races watched humans and laughed. Humans argued among themselves. Humans showed emotion. Humans tried to make peace. To the cold, calculating minds of the galaxy, these things looked like weakness. In a great hall made of living crystal, the leaders of the strongest alien empires gathered. Massive beings floated, walked, or hovered above the floor. Some had sharp claws. Some had glowing eyes. Some did not even have faces. They spoke in cold, emotionless voices and shared holographic images of human colonies. Green worlds, blue oceans, cities filled with light. One alien voice echoed through the hall. Humans grow too fast. Another answered. They spread without fear. A third said. They feel pain deeply. That makes them good prey. The word prey filled the chamber. There was no anger in the room. No hate, only hunger and calculation. A vote was taken. No human voice was present. No warning was sent. The galaxy decided humans would be hunted. The first attacks were quiet. Human trade ships vanished along routes that were thought to be safe. Their crews were taken alive. Some were studied. Some were used for sport. Others were never seen again. At first, human leaders believed it was piracy. They sent patrols to investigate. Those ships did not return. Then, entire colonies went silent. On the edge of human space, a small farming world stopped answering all calls. Satellite images showed burned fields and broken cities. No signals. No life signs. Human rescue ships arrived far too late. They found cages. Thousands of empty cages. Fear began to spread across human space like a virus. People watched the stars at night and felt unseen eyes watching back. Parents kept children indoors. Soldiers stood ready but did not know who or what they were supposed to be fighting. Then, the first survivors arrived. A damaged transport ship drifted into a human station. Its hull was torn open, and blood covered the floors. Only 12 humans were alive out of a crew of hundreds. They all told the same terrifying story. Alien ships came without warning. Planetary defense systems failed in seconds. But the humans weren't killed right away. They were chased. Aliens hunted them through city streets and dense forests. The aliens laughed as they ran. The survivors said the aliens recorded everything. The fear, the screams, the raw desperation. One survivor, a young woman with shaking hands and haunted eyes, spoke words that were soon shared across every human network. They didn't want our land, she whispered. They wanted us. Human leaders demanded answers from the galactic community. They sent messages calling for peace, talks, trade meetings, and emergency councils. No one answered. Instead, more worlds fell. Human fleets tried to defend the border systems. Their ships were destroyed with terrifying ease. Alien weapons cut through their shields like paper. Entire human task forces were erased from existence in mere minutes. The galaxy watched and learned. Humans fought hard. Humans died loudly. Humans broke emotionally. To the hunters, this was all the proof they needed. The galaxy began to enjoy the hunt. News channels across human space eventually stopped showing the attacks. It was too painful, too terrifying. Families whispered about escape plans. Some groups tried to flee known space entirely, heading into the uncharted darkness between the stars. The aliens followed them there too. On a distant mining colony, a human governor recorded a final, desperate message. His face was tired, his voice was calm, but his eyes showed a primal fear. "We did everything they asked," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We stayed small. We avoided conflict. We believed kindness would protect us." Behind him, explosions shook the room, showering sparks from the ceiling. "They are coming now," he said, looking just past the camera. "If anyone hears this, remember us." The signal cut out. That message reached Earth, and for the first time in its history, the entire planet went silent. There were no grand speeches, no hollow promises of victory, no calls for revenge. Human leaders met behind closed, heavily guarded doors. Military commanders shared grim data. Scientists were ordered to unlock their most restricted, most dangerous projects. Old rules were questioned, old limits were removed. In one of these secret meetings, a general spoke quietly, his voice heavy. They see us as prey, another officer replied. Then they will never stop. No one in the room argued. They all knew it was the truth. In the deep space beyond human borders, something changed. Ships that were once built only for defense were armed with devastating new weapons. Fleets that once stood apart were brought together under a single, unified command, and in the ruins of a destroyed colony, a single automated beacon flickered to life. It began to send one message, broadcasting on every known frequency. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. You chose to hunt us. If we survive, you will not. The galaxy heard it and laughed. They did not understand. Not yet. The hunt had begun. It was true. But they had chosen the wrong species to chase. They had taught humanity that survival was about being the stronger predator. The galaxy thought the hunt was going well. To the relentless predators that stalked the void, everything seemed to be proceeding as planned. Human ships still fled. Human worlds still burned. Human signals still flickered and went silent, one by one. To the hunters, this was the familiar rhythm of conquest. Victory was not just possible. It was a matter of time. But deep inside the shrinking borders of human space, something very different was happening. Something the galaxy, in its arrogance, failed to see. The humans had stopped screaming. They stopped sending desperate public messages, pleading for mercy or calling for aid. News networks that once broadcast defiance 24/7 went dark. Civilian channels, once filled with the chatter and life of a vibrant species, simply shut down. From the outside, it looked like a total collapse. Like fear had finally, definitively crushed the human spirit. The predators sneered. The prey had broken. In truth, the humans were thinking. Human leaders no longer met in grand, sunlit rooms with cameras and grand speeches. Those days were over. Now, they gathered in secret, deep underground on besieged worlds, inside cloaked stations drifting in the black, and within heavily shielded deep space bunkers. Only a select few were ever allowed to enter. Phones were banned. Digital records were wiped clean the moment they were created. Every single meeting began the same way. A list of lost worlds was read aloud. A precise count of the dead was recited. And then, they would watch. Images of their people in cages, of their cities turned to ash. No one spoke during these moments. The silence was heavier than any planet. But after the silence, the questions they asked had changed. They were no longer asking, "How do we escape?" They were no longer desperately debating, "How do we beg for peace?" The question that now echoed in those hidden rooms was simple and terrifying. How do predators think? Human scientists, sociologists, and military strategists pored over every scrap of data. They studied alien attacks frame by frame, analyzing every engagement. They looked at hunting patterns, weapon choices, and fleet movement styles. A clear picture began to emerge. The aliens loved speed. They loved to strike hard and fast. They loved inspiring terror. Most of all, they loved watching humans run. That was the key. The fear, the chase, the panic hit made the hunt exciting for them. It was a sport. So, the humans made a decision. A cold, unified decision. They would take the fear away. Across the remnants of human space, a quiet order was sent. It was not a public broadcast. It never reached civilians. It was a ghost signal. A whisper on encrypted channels that reached only soldiers, engineers, and fleet commanders. The order contained 3 words: withdraw, consolidate, disappear. Human engineers worked without rest, driven by a cold fury. They upgraded weapons not for elegance or range, but for brutal, close-quarters efficiency. Power systems were pushed far beyond their designated safe limits. Manuals filled with safety regulations were marked up with red lines, crossing out every rule that prioritized survival over victory. One exhausted engineer looked at his commander, gesturing to an overloaded power core. "What if it fails?" he asked. The commander, her face etched with exhaustion and resolve, replied without looking away from her screen. "Then it only needs to fail once." Elsewhere, in labs sealed for decades, human scientists opened vaults that had been long forbidden. Projects once banned as too dangerous, too unethical, too monstrous, were activated. This wasn't because humans had a sudden desire to destroy the galaxy. It was because they understood that extinction was infinitely worse. Back in what used to be human territory, the alien hunters began to notice something strange. The colonies they arrived at were eerily empty. There were no screams, no pockets of resistance to crush, no thrilling chases through city streets. Most unsettling of all, there was no running prey. Alien scouts landed on worlds that still had food on the tables, breathable air, and active power grids. But there were no people. Houses stood untouched, silent museums of a vanished population. Toys lay on the floors of nurseries. Screens were paused mid-sentence, frozen in time. It just felt wrong. It was a hunt with no trophy. A few of the more cautious alien commanders suggested prudence. This was unnatural, but most of them laughed it off. Prey runs. Prey hides. That's what prey does. Prey does not plan. Then the first alien ship vanished. It was a small, fast scout vessel on a routine patrol. It sent its standard hourly report and then, simply, nothing. No explosion was detected. No debris field was found. No distress signal was ever sent. The wider galaxy assumed it was a simple malfunction. These things happen. 2 more ships, sent along the same route to investigate, vanished in precisely the same way. Now, alien commanders grew angry. This was an insult. They dispatched a full destroyer squadron to the area. A fist of steel and plasma meant to obliterate whatever primitive trick the humans were attempting. Only 1 ship from that squadron returned. Its hull was sliced open, not by external weapons, but as if it had been carved from the inside out. Its own powerful weapons were untouched. Its entire crew was gone and carved into the metal of the bridge wall. Using precise, high-energy heat, were to human words, we observed. A ripple of something that felt disturbingly like fear spread through the alien fleets. This was not how prey was supposed to act. Still, the momentum of their invasion was too great. The galaxy pushed forward, convinced this was a minor, isolated anomaly. Then came the first real trap, an entire alien battle fleet, drawn by a weak, desperate-sounding human signal, warped into a supposedly empty system. The signal was exactly the kind the hunters loved, the perfect bait. As their ships entered high orbit around a barren planet, space itself went dark. Stars vanished from their sensors. All communications, internal and external, died. Gravity twisted, becoming a weapon against them. Human-laid mines activated all at once. But these weren't explosive. They were far more insidious. They were disabling. A wave of energy washed over the fleet, and chaos erupted. Alien ships, their navigation systems now feeding them lies, slammed into each other. Engines sputtered and failed. Shields collapsed. And from the shadows, the ghost fleet of human ships appeared. They did not charge in with a battle cry. They did not broadcast threats or demands. They simply fired once. Each ship fired a single, perfectly aimed, overcharged shot at a pre-calculated weak point. When the darkness lifted and the system returned to normal, nothing remained of the alien fleet but a silent, expanding cloud of vaporized metal. There were no survivors. On the bridge of the human command ship, the crew watched in absolute silence. There were no cheers. There was no relief. An officer, his voice barely a whisper, finally spoke. It worked. The commander nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the disappearing debris field. Then we don't stop. Across the galaxy, similar events began to occur, small, controlled, impossibly precise. Human strikes were rare, but they were perfect. The hunters, the predators who had dominated the stars, began to whisper among themselves. The prey was not running anymore. The prey was setting the field of battle. In a hidden human command center, a single, vast screen showed a map of alien-controlled space. Slowly, it was lighting up with red markers. Each marker was a future target, each one chosen not out of emotion or revenge, but out of cold, brutal logic. A young officer, looking at the growing number of red lights, asked the question that everyone in the room feared. How far do we go? The room was silent for a long moment. Then the highest commander in the human military answered, his voice low and steady. As far as we must, so that this never, ever happens again. Far away, in the heart of their empire. The alien leaders met in a state of growing confusion and alarm. The reports contradicted each other. Fleets were vanishing. Entire worlds they had conquered were going silent without a single sign of battle. One ancient, wise alien finally spoke the words no one wanted to hear. The humans, they are learning. The hunt was no longer one-sided. The game had changed. And somewhere in the deep, silent darkness of space, the first true human strike force, a fleet of avenging ghosts, moved quietly toward its target. The galaxy was about to learn something terrifying. Humans were done running. The galaxy laughed at the warnings from their high towers and living hulls. Alien leaders dismissed the reports. Lost fleets were attributed to pilot error, cosmic storms, or traitors. In their official records, humans remained classified as prey, and prey didn't plan wars. Prey didn't strike first. It was a belief that would be their undoing. The first human strike force moved in absolute silence. It didn't follow the known trade routes or use the jump points monitored by alien sensors. Instead, human navigators guided the fleet through the dark, uncharted spaces between stars, using ancient maps and taking risky paths the aliens had long forgotten. Their target was chosen with chilling precision. Not a military capital, not a border fortress. It was a hunting world, a planet famous across the galaxy as a grotesque resort, where alien nobles paid fortunes to hunt living prey. Humans had been brought here in cages. Their terror had been broadcast as entertainment. Every human commander knew its name. They had all watched the recordings. The fleet stopped far from the system, powering down to near-complete cold. The crews waited in the dark, in the quiet. There were no rousing speeches, no flags raised. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. Human probes slipped into the system first, silent ghosts mapping defense, grids, power stations, and communication towers. They found something that made the command deck fall utterly still. Cages, human cages. Some were empty, some were not. The order came, devoid of all emotion. Proceed. The human ships didn't rush in. They deployed devices throughout the system, small, quiet machines that attached themselves to asteroids and moons. And then they waited. As the local star reached a specific point in its cycle, the machines activated in unison. Across the hunting world, power died, shields collapsed, cities went dark, orbital platforms drifted blind and useless. The alien hunters laughed at first, assuming it was a simple power failure. Then their sky caught fire. Human weapons struck from orbit with perfect, synchronized timing. This wasn't an indiscriminate bombardment. It wasn't chaos. It was surgery. Power centers vanished. Spaceports were vaporized. Control towers melted into slag. Every single structure built for the purpose of the hunt was erased in minutes. Alien leaders tried desperately to send distress calls. Nothing left the system. As the smoke billowed into the darkened sky, human ships descended. Ground teams landed near the cages, moving with disciplined speed. Guards were disabled, not engaged in firefights. Security systems were shut down, not blasted apart. The human soldiers didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They just opened the cages. Those who could walk were gently guided to the landing craft. Those who couldn't were carried. Human medics worked without rest, their faces grim but determined. Above them, the warships finished their task. The hunting world wasn't left as a burning ruin. It was left empty. Before departing, the humans did one last thing. They broadcast a simple message on every known alien frequency. This world is closed. Then, they scrubbed it from every navigation chart. When alien scout ships finally arrived days later, they found an unnerving silence. No bodies, no cities, no life. Only the fresh scars on the planet's surface and a profound, chilling sense of dread. The news spread slowly at first, met with disbelief. A single human strike couldn't just erase a world like that. It was impossible. Then more reports came in. A major weapons factory, gone. A critical supply hub, vanished. A deep space research station, destroyed from the inside out. The humans weren't attacking borders, they were attacking purpose. Alien generals scrambled their fleets, chasing shadows through the void. Human ships would appear, strike with devastating precision, and disappear back into the darkness. They didn't hold territory. They didn't issue demands. They simply removed things. Finally, an alien admiral managed to corner and capture a lone human vessel after a rare, chaotic engagement. The crew was dead. The ship was heavily damaged but structurally intact. Inside, they found something far more terrifying than any weapon. They found records, meticulous logs detailing human strategic planning that stretched years, even decades into the future. Targets were listed in cold, analytical detail, estimated losses, projected timeframes. But it was the final line of the document that made the Admiral's blood run cold. Survival probability for hostile civilizations, 0. Panic began to ripple through the galactic empires for the first time. Alien civilians started asking questions. The brutal hunting broadcasts went off the air. Worlds that had once supplied prey now begged for military protection. Some species scrambled to publicly distance themselves from the atrocities, issuing hollow apologies. It was far too late. Human strategy didn't change based on who said sorry. In a secret command center, deep within human territory, the strike was reviewed. Success rate, total, human losses, minimal. A junior officer, his voice barely a whisper, asked, "Will they stop hunting us now?" The commanding officer looked at a tactical display showing dozens of future targets, each one a vital organ of the alien empires. "No," he said, his voice flat. "But they will understand something." "What's that, sir?" the officer asked. "That hunting us costs everything. The next target on the List was larger, more heavily protected. More important, this time, there were no cages to open, no one to rescue. This time, the galaxy would be forced to watch. Far away, an ancient alien council, beings who had seen the rise and fall of countless species, finally accepted the horrifying truth. Humans were not prey. They weren't even enemies in the traditional sense. They were an ending, and the first strike was only the beginning. The galaxy could no longer ignore the truth. Human attacks, once dismissed as rare, isolated events, were becoming a relentless storm. Supply routes failed. Military outposts fell silent. Entire star systems, vital to the galactic network, simply went dark without a single warning. What had been seen as random piracy or desperate raids now revealed a terrifying pattern. The humans weren't just running and hiding anymore. They were fighting back, forcing the entire galaxy to finally pay attention. In the gleaming halls of ancient capitals, alien leaders convened in emergency councils. Species that had been locked in bitter hatred for centuries now sat side by side, their old rivalries dwarfed by a new, shared terror. Long-standing wars were put on indefinite hold. Ancient grudges and matters of pride were reluctantly pushed aside. Fear, it turned out, was a powerful unifier. For the first time in recorded history, a unified galactic command was forged from this crucible of anxiety. Its one and only purpose was clear and absolute: stop humanity, before the delicate balance of the galaxy was shattered beyond repair. Massive fleets were assembled, a spectacle of galactic might. Thousands upon thousands of ships, representing dozens of civilizations, moved as one body, filling the void of space with a torrent of light and raw power. The most advanced weapons, products of millennia of innovation, were brought online and armed. Intricate defensive formations were practiced and refined, over and over, until they were flawless. The collective wisdom of the galaxy was certain of one thing: overwhelming strength would crush this human problem once and for all. But deep within their own territory, humanity was watching. In quiet command centers, far from the front lines, human commanders studied the incoming data with an unnerving calmness. There was no shouting, no panic debate. This enemy, for all its size and power, was slow, predictable, and moving exactly as they had calculated. Humanity had faced far worse odds and survived. Their response was methodical. Civilian worlds were quietly secured. Non-essential outposts and stations were evacuated. Their populations moved to fortified core systems. Human space strategically shrank, becoming smaller, but infinitely stronger, more defensible. Every system was prepared, a link in a chain designed to delay, to confuse, and to bleed the approaching fleets. Humanity did not meet the galactic armada at the border. They waited. When the first massive alien fleet crossed into human-controlled space, it found nothing, just the cold, silent emptiness of the void. No patrols challenged them. No warning beacons flashed. No resistance met their advance. It felt deeply, profoundly wrong. Then, the real attack began. Communications across the fleet flickered and died. Navigation signals began to shift, subtly at first, then wildly. Star charts, once reliable guides, no longer matched the reality outside their viewports. Entire squadrons drifted out of formation as orders from their commanders arrived hours late, or sometimes, not at all. Human electronic warfare had enveloped them like a ghost. Then, the physical strikes started. Small, impossibly fast human strike groups materialized at the vulnerable edges of the armada. They weren't aiming for the heavily armored battleships. They targeted sensor rays, blinding the fleet's eyes. They hit unprotected fuel tankers, not warships. They destroyed communication relays, deafening the command structure. Confusion spread faster than physical damage. Alien commanders, lost in a sea of digital noise, tried desperately to reorganize, but every maneuver seemed to expose a new weakness, a new vulnerability that the humans instantly exploited. The human attacks were surgical, precise, and brutally efficient. They never stayed long enough to be cornered, vanishing back into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. When the vast alien fleets finally fired back with overwhelming force, they often hit nothing but empty space. Or worse, in the chaos, they hit each other. The galaxy, though shocked, adapted quickly. New electronic countermeasures were rapidly developed and deployed. Escort ships tightened their formations, creating an impenetrable screen around the capital ships. Patrol wings expanded their search patterns, determined to catch the elusive human forces. And this time, the humans allowed themselves to be seen. Near a dense, chaotic star cluster, a large-scale battle erupted. For the first time, human and alien ships exchanged fire openly, broadside to broadside. The darkness was torn apart by explosions. Blazing debris scattered across the starfield like deadly shrapnel. For the first time, humans were fighting a conventional battle. The Galactic Command saw its chance. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Reinforcements, held in reserve, poured into the system, eager to surround and annihilate the human fleet. Victory, it seemed, was finally within their grasp. And then, the environment itself turned against them. Human engineers had been quietly altering the battlefield for weeks. Gravity fields, meticulously mapped by the alien navigators, suddenly shifted and warped. Lethal radiation levels spiked. Without warning, automated defense platforms, hidden on asteroids and in nebulae, activated and opened fire from all directions. The alien fleets, caught completely off guard, struggled to adapt to a battle space that had become an unpredictable death trap. As they floundered, the human ships began a slow, calculated withdrawal, deliberately drawing the enemy deeper and deeper into the unstable, weaponized space. When the final systems activated, the entire region became an uncontrollable vortex of chaos. The galaxy lost a staggering number of ships that day. Humanity suffered losses too. But they had taught the galaxy a brutal lesson. Humanity could not only choose where and when to fight, they could shape the very battlefield itself. News of the devastating battle and the tactics used spread like a shockwave across the galaxy. The initial confidence of the unified command began to crack. On countless worlds, ordinary citizens began to question their leaders. Interstellar traders, fearing for their lives and their cargo, refused to travel the now dangerous routes. Smaller species, caught between the two giants, grew terrified of being crushed in the crossfire. The unity forged by fear began to fray. Some alien governments started calling for negotiations. Others, enraged by their losses, demanded even harsher, more destructive attacks. The galaxy was dangerously divided. Humanity watched this growing division with careful precision. They didn't push too hard, avoiding actions that would reunify their enemies. But they didn't slow down either. Their actions remained measured, focused on limiting collateral damage while maintaining relentless pressure. Human commanders understood a crucial truth. If they cornered the galaxy, if they made it feel like it had no other choice but to fight to the death, the war would become a spiral of annihilation that would never end. So, they changed their approach. Instead of constant, harassing strikes, they created pauses, long stretches of quiet, unnerving moments where nothing happened. No attacks, no messages, just silence. For the alien fleets on high alert, the silence was more unsettling than combat. They waited, perpetually tense, utterly exhausted. Resources dwindled, morale plummeted. Commanders began to fear every shadow, every sensor ghost. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, the humans would strike again somewhere completely different, completely unexpected. The galaxy finally understood. It wasn't fighting a war, it was reacting to one. It had no control. Finally, a high-level alien council, representing the core powers of the coalition, sent a formal message to Earth. It was a message that would have been unthinkable just months before. "We acknowledge your strength," it read. "We propose talks to prevent further destruction." Human leaders received the message. They did not reject it, but they did not accept it either. Instead, they sent back a reply with a single, non-negotiable condition: end the hunt. Everywhere, that simple demand sent the galaxy into turmoil. Some species, weary of war, readily agreed. Others, driven by pride and a desire for revenge, resisted. Old habits, they discovered, were hard to break. And so, human forces remained ready, not advancing recklessly, not retreating, just waiting, poised on the edge of their territory. As fleets stood face to face across the silent gulf of stars, a profound truth settled over everyone. The galaxy had tried to crush humanity, and it had failed. Now, it had to make a much harder decision, whether to keep fighting a war it could not win, or to finally, after centuries of aggression, stop hunting. And the answer was coming. The galaxy didn't die with a bang. It fell apart quietly, piece by piece. First, the trade routes failed. Ships that were once expected weekly, then daily, simply stopped arriving. Food shipments were delayed, then they were lost entirely. On worlds that had never known a single moment of darkness, the energy grids flickered and died. At first, the alien leaders tried to calm their people. They stood before cameras and crowds, promising that everything was under control, that these were just temporary setbacks. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. The human strikes continued, steady and relentless. There was no rush, no panic in their attacks. They didn't slow down, either. Every single assault followed the same cold, Calculated pattern. Find what allows a civilization to function and remove it. Shipyards, the birthplaces of starships, vanished in silent flashes of light. Fuel depots that powered entire fleets burned for weeks, painting the skies orange. Communication hubs that connected empires went dark. The worlds themselves were left alive, but they were helpless, cut off, and alone. Alien fleets still existed, vast armadas that had once projected power across the stars. But they couldn't move without fuel. Armies still stood ready, millions of soldiers armed with advanced weapons. But they couldn't fight without food. All their incredible technology, all their scientific marvels, meant nothing when the systems that held them together collapsed. Humans understood this with terrifying clarity. They had studied their enemies for generations. They knew which worlds grew the food, which worlds trained the soldiers, which planets built the ships, and which held the seats of political power. And then, one by one, they began to erase the connections between them. Panic took hold on countless planets. Governments that had stood for millennia crumbled under the weight of fear and helplessness. Riots broke out in the streets as citizens demanded protection that their leaders could no longer provide. Some alien species tried to hide. They shut down their gleaming cities, powered down their networks, and moved their populations into deep underground bunkers. They erased their digital histories and ceased all broadcasts, believing that silence would be their shield. They thought if they couldn't be seen or heard, humanity would pass them by. But human sensors still found them. Silence wasn't safety. It was just a different kind of surrender. Human fleets would appear in orbit without any warning, deliver their precise, crippling strikes, and then vanish back into the void. Sometimes they destroyed military targets. Other times, they did nothing at all. They would just hang in the sky, watching, letting the dread and paranoia do their work for them. That was worse. Fear grew much faster in the silence, in the awful anticipation of what might happen next. Alien leaders, desperate and broken, began sending messages of surrender. These weren't the arrogant demands of the past. They were pleas. They offered entire star systems, vast resources, even their own people as prisoners. They offered anything and everything, begging for a response. But the humans never answered. The void remained silent. On one of the most heavily populated worlds in the galaxy, the ruling council gathered for a final, desperate meeting. These were the same individuals who had once voted enthusiastically to hunt humans for sport and glory. Now, they faced their own extinction. We were wrong, one leader admitted, their voice trembling. We misjudged them completely. Another looked at the tactical display, showing human fleets closing in from all sides. They will not stop, he said. A third whispered the terrible truth that had dawned on them all. Because we wouldn't have stopped. That world was neutralized 2 days later. It wasn't bombed. It wasn't burned. The humans simply cut off its star from the vast network of power collectors that fed it. The planet's delicate, artificially maintained climate systems collapsed. Its massive hydroponic farms failed. Without power, without heat, without food, life just ended. Within months, a world of billions was a frozen, silent tomb. Other worlds watched the data streams, and they understood. There were no safe places left. Some species, in their terror, tried to blame each other. Ancient alliances shattered overnight. Former partners turned on each other, hoping to create enough chaos to distract humanity, to offer up a different target. But the humans used the chaos. They watched and waited. When two fleets moved to attack each other, humans would strike their undefended homeworlds. They hit border systems during brutal civil wars. They patiently waited until panic and infighting weakened defenses, and then they moved in. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, doing humanity's work for it. Back on Earth, there were no celebrations. The cities were quiet. People gathered in public squares, watching the lists of neutralized systems scroll across massive screens. There was no cheering, no victory parties. There was only a grim, quiet resolve. A human historian, documenting the conflict for future generations, recorded a message. "We did not want this," she said, her voice heavy. But wanting did not matter. Survival did. The military leaders continued their planning. They never spoke of victory. They only spoke of completion. Then, the final phase began. The grand human fleets split into dozens of smaller, autonomous battle groups. Each group was given a list of targets and a single, simple directive: leave nothing that can rise again. Some alien species attempted one last, desperate gamble. They poured all their remaining resources into building massive colony ships, arc ships designed to carry the last survivors of their kind into the unexplored darkness between galaxies. They fled, hoping to start over, far from humanity's reach. Humans followed them. Those Ark ships were later found drifting in the silent void, their systems cold but undamaged. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, just silence. They were empty. The legends of the galaxy began to change. Humans were no longer prey or even enemies. They were given a new name, the Silence. Alien children were taught to fear the quiet emptiness of space more than an enemy fleet. Priests no longer prayed to their gods for salvation. They prayed to the void itself, begging that the silence would not notice them. One ancient, philosophical species tried something different. They sent no ships. They broadcast no messages. They erased themselves. They systematically dismantled their own cities, burned their libraries and data archives, and ended their own civilization, choosing self-inflicted oblivion over facing humanity. Human observation ships watched, recorded it all, and then simply moved on. Near the very edge of known space, a final alien stronghold gathered its remaining forces. This world was a monument to their arrogance. It was here that many of the most ruthless hunters had once lived. It was here that the very idea of hunting humans had been celebrated as a noble sport. Now, it was a fortress of absolute fear. As the final human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, a single, desperate transmission was sent. "We surrender, please." The human commander listened to the plea. Then, he gave the final order. The stronghold burned until it was nothing but dust and echoes. When it was over, the galaxy was broken. The stars still shone, and the planets still turned on their axes. But the great civilizations were gone. No fleets patrolled the trade lanes. No grand councils debated the fate of the stars. Only ruins and silence remained. In the quiet that followed, a young human officer aboard the flagship asked the question that no one wanted to answer. "Are we done?" The commander stared at the holographic star map. Thousands of systems were now marked as pacified. Only a few unmarked, unexplored systems remained at the furthest fringes. "Almost," he said, his voice low and hard, because there was still one thing left, memory, and humans would never, ever allow the galaxy to forget what happened when it chose them as prey. The galaxy became quiet, not peaceful, not healed, just a quiet. Where bustling trade lanes once glowed with the light of 1,000 ships, there was only empty, silent space. Where great empires once broadcast their pride across the cosmos, there were only broken worlds and drifting ruins. The stars themselves hadn't changed, of course, but everything that existed beneath them had been fundamentally and forever altered. Down on Earth, humans did not celebrate. There were no victory parades marching through the streets of capital cities. No triumphant songs were written. No monuments were raised to conquest. The war, the great, terrible war, was finally over, but no one dared to call it a triumph. It was simply an ending, an exhaustion, a final, shuddering breath. Human fleets, what was left of them, slowly limped their way back home. Some ships were scarred and twisted, damaged beyond any hope of repair, destined to become floating museums or be broken down for scrap. Some carried crews who would never speak of what they had seen, their voices stolen by the horrors of the void. And so many humans returned with scars that no medbay or doctor could ever remove, etched not onto their skin, but onto their very souls. They had survived. For now, that was enough. On Earth, the leaders of humanity gathered one final time. They didn't meet in secret, underground bunkers, their faces illuminated by the frantic glow of tactical displays. They didn't meet in fear. This time, they met in open halls, beneath open skies, as if daring the universe to challenge them again. The question before them was stark in its simplicity. What now? The galaxy was broken. No major powers remained to challenge them or anyone else. Only scattered survivors, remnants of once proud species, now hid among distant, forgotten stars. They were the ones who had been too small, too weak, or simply too far away to have mattered during the war. They were the forgotten footnotes of a galactic tragedy. Some humans argued that this was their moment to rule, to take the throne of the galaxy they had so brutally won. Others believed they should rebuild, but this time, rebuild the galaxy in their own image, creating a new order from the ashes of the old. But many, perhaps the wisest among them, feared what humanity had been forced to become. They looked at their own hands and saw not saviors, but destroyers. The highest commander, a veteran of 100 battles, listened patiently to all of them. He heard the arguments for empire, for reconstruction, and for fear. Then, when all had been said, he stood and spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of all they had lost. "We were hunted," he said, his words echoing in the sudden silence. "We were hunted because the powers of the galaxy saw us as weak. If we now rule them, if we take their place, We become the very thing that hunted us. No one argued. The truth of his words was undeniable. In that moment, humanity made its choice. They would not rule the galaxy. They would not become the new tyrants. They would leave it alone. Human fleets mobilized one last time, not to attack, not to conquer, but to deliver a message, to warn. They traveled to the ruined systems and the silent, dead worlds of their former enemies, and in the orbit of each shattered planet, they placed a beacon. Each beacon was identical, a silent, obsidian sentinel broadcasting the same message, translated into every known language, a final epitaph for an age of arrogance. Here lies the end of an age. Do not hunt. Do not test. We will not come again. And then, just as they promised, humans withdrew. Their borders were sealed. The old trade routes were abandoned and left to go cold. Human space became a quiet, distant, and heavily guarded fortress. No ships were allowed to enter without explicit permission. No messages from the outside were ever answered. To the scattered survivors watching from afar, it was as if humanity had simply vanished from the universe, becoming ghosts in their own corner of the sky. But the memory of them did not vanish. The memory grew into legend, and the legend into something far more potent. Stories spread like wildfire among the fledgling species that were beginning to peek out from the rubble. Parents warned their children about the quiet stars where the humans lived. Elders told tales of the prey that had refused to be prey, the species that had turned and brought about an extinction, not with rage, not with madness, but with a terrifying, cold, and absolute focus. Generations passed, centuries turned into millennia. New civilizations rose slowly and cautiously among the ruins of the old. They were explorers and scholars, and they studied the ancient records they found, digging through layers of wartime propaganda and self-serving lies. And there, buried deep in the archives, they found the truth. Humans had asked for peace. They had tried to negotiate. They had pleaded, begged even, to just be left alone. And the galaxy, in its hubris, had laughed at them. Now, no one was laughing. The boldest explorers, those who drifted a little too close to the borders of human space, told chilling tales when they returned. They spoke of unimaginably powerful defenses, silent and waiting. They described vast, silent fleets hanging in the dark between stars, watching, always watching. The humans never chased them. They never sent threats. They simply watched. And that was more than enough. Back on Earth, and on the settled human worlds, life continued. Children grew up learning the history of the Great War, not as a source of pride, but as a burden of responsibility. Schools taught the conflict as a lesson, a cautionary tale. Strength without control is destruction, the teachers would say, and mercy without limits is extinction. Humanity had learned both lessons in the hardest way imaginable. They rebuilt their society slowly, carefully. Their technology advanced to levels the old empires could have only dreamed of, but their expansion did not. They remained within their designated borders, tirelessly guarding the silence they had paid for with their souls. Then one day, far, far into the future, a small, unassuming alien probe drifted near one of the ancient human beacons. Its creators were a young species, full of curiosity, but tempered with a caution born from the galaxy's many ghost stories. They detected the beacon's signal, and with great effort, they decoded its simple, stark message. They read the words. They looked towards the quiet, guarded stars, and then, they turned their probe around and went home. The galaxy remembered. It remembered because the truth was now written across the stars. In the void where empires used to be, humans were not heroes, and they were not monsters. They were, and always had been, survivors. And when the galaxy had collectively decided that humanity was prey, humanity decided something else entirely. They decided the hunt would end forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into science fiction lore. See you next time.